Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tabletop History. The first one was very well received, and so I thought let's do some more. And this time we're going to do something pretty fun. We're going to talk about Rackham miniatures, which those of you who've been around in the wargaming world for, more than a few years will probably know Rackham miniatures. You may have seen a few of them around. They are a very interesting company with a short but impactful lifespan. So let's just get right into it because there's a lot here. And let me tell you what, this one was actually really tough to research because there's not a lot of inside information on exactly what happened. So this is going to be fun. All right, let's start at the beginning. So 1997, we've got Jean Bay. Rackham is a French company. Was a French company. So Jean Bay founds Rackham. And the basic conception is that the studio was built on the idea of making really beautiful miniatures. Okay? It really was something that's made the game stand apart, and we're going to see that as we move forward. So the basic game was Confrontation. Now, the image I have here is actually the hardback cover of the third edition, but that's because it's very, very impossible to find good images of the first and second edition, just because the way it was released, and it's not really important. But just know that was the game, Confrontation. The first edition was released mainly in Europe. It didn't have a native English translation. The second edition, which came soon afterward and did clean up some of the rules, was translated into English. But what's funny about it is how much of it I saw still at that time that was in another language. Like, you could see the French on a lot of the things, or the French inspiration. And what's really funny about it is how exotic it made it. I know it sounds stupid, but just look at that cover. Troisième édition, or whatever, I don't know. Just like, there is something about it, especially to me being, a younger person here in the U.S., seeing this strange French game with this really amazing, beautiful art. It just made it something very unique. And as I said, what really distinguished them very early on, in the early 2000s when they came to America and I became aware of them, was this. Here was a company that had a very clear vision and a unique aesthetic, and frankly, at that time, when miniatures were for the most part still metal, there were certainly exceptions. But like even GW was making some plastic kits and some of the like cheap big kits back then. But a lot of miniatures, and certainly most companies outside of Games Workshop, were 100% metal. And these were the best metal miniatures in the world. So let's talk about that. What did the rest of the world look like at that time? So let's go back to 2001, when really this starts to become popular in America. Confrontation. I remember it's around that time that my local game store got them in. So what was going on was a lot. This was a boom time for the gaming industry as a whole. Okay? More people are playing more games. You've got the growth of the internet at this time period. Like in the early 2000s, the internet starts really taking off and connecting people because the amount of broadband starts increasing. Now, it would take till 2004-ish to actually reach a sort of critical mass. But it doesn't matter. The point is, around here, people are starting to be able to connect a lot easier. It's funny to think that the internet has had such a huge impact on our culture in such a short time, 15 years, from this point I'm talking about. But here we are. But there was so many big things going on. Wizards of the Coast releases the OGL. And no matter how big the miniatures game market is, it's always been a shadow of the RPG market and the CCG market. And Magic is huge at this time. Wizards releases the new edition of D&D with the open game license. And this huge flood of gamers is coming into the gaming market. The number of people who start playing at this time period is massive. Adjusted for inflation, 2001, 2002 are some of the biggest years Games Workshop ever had. So what you've got is a lot of people wandering into game stores to buy these books, because you're still not as much ordering these online at this time. You're probably still going to a friendly local game store. And into those game stores, where these people would wander, you would find these Rackham miniatures, and you would see these strange exotic boxes and books and clam packs, and they would have these pictures. And what was genius about the blister packs, something that other manufacturers would later do, so at the time, Games Workshop's blister packs were literally just like a red background or something like that, or a green background with the metal miniature inside. Okay? That was it. It just, you could see the raw metal. But Rackham flipped the clam pack around. And the thing you saw, the thing that sat on the shelf that you stared at when you looked at the wall, was this masterfully painted image of the miniature on its game card. They were, again, they were really leading the way in a lot of areas. Each miniature coming with its game card rules. They weren't the first to do this, certainly, but their game cards were some of the most impressive, and certainly they were one of the ones, a company that helped popularize it. So you look at the two games next to each other on the shelf. One is just a big wall of steel, right? Just blank gray metal. And the other is a wall of these beautiful images painted to this insane standard at the time. So the French style that people talk about in painting, this is a lot of where it comes from, right? It starts to become popular in this time period. This is kind of where it first became popular in the U.S. and well known. So, of these like high contrasts and these interesting color choices, these much brighter images, things like that. So, let's look at some miniatures from that time. I've got this. Now remember, GW is also booming at this time, because I know I'm disparaging their clam packs, but remember, 2001 is also when they launched the Lord of the Rings game. And that was a massive seller for them. Like, those movies were so big, okay? And, again, a lot of people walked into stores saw the Lord of the Rings and started playing miniature games because of the Lord of the Rings. And those are some Uruk-hai miniatures from around this time period. They're fine. They look like the Uruk-hai from the movies. They're okay. I don't think there's anything terrible about them, but they're certainly not great. Obviously, the Lord of the Rings miniatures were, unlike Warhammer, were true 28mm scales. They were a little smaller by comparison. Here's another miniature that was released in 2001. Just like this is the random member of a bolt thrower crew. Yeah, okay. He looks fine. He's a fine miniature. But here is what Rackham was releasing around this same time. Yeah. And this is the image on the clam pack or whatever when you walk in the store. Okay? I want you to really think about how insane this is. Right? Look at that thing. That thing is amazing by today's standards. Now, I've picked a particularly beautiful model. I'll openly admit my comparison's not totally fair. Random bolt thrower crew guy and a couple Uruks compared to what's effectively a really unique character model may not be the most fair comparison. But I just want to point out the kinds of things that they were capable of at this time. And certainly there were some other impressive miniatures coming out of other companies too. But these were just beyond. The entire line was just full of things like this. This absolutely stunningly unique aesthetic. So what happens? Well, they grow. They grow quite a bit. Growth. So, the years leading up to sort of 2005, 2006 were very good years for Rackham. At its peak, Rackham has about 70 associates, and they want to start expanding. They started offering additional games. And when I say they're nipping at the heels of P3 and GW, I really mean it. So in the little image here is the ICV2 report, which is sort of this survey report of game stores, and I had to go back and dig and find the 2006 reports. That's the oldest report I could find where they were actually separating out non-collectible miniature games, which is what they call this. Collectible, you might think, well, these are collectible. Collectible means like randomized packs. If you think of like collectible card games where the packs are random, they have rarity. You can't necessarily guarantee you're going to get a certain thing, right? When I open a pack of Magic cards, I can't guarantee what's inside. That's a collectible game, as ICV2 defines it. Whereas here, I walk in and buy what I want, right? If I want some orcs, I'm going to get some orcs or whatever. So in 2006, Confrontation is number 5 on this list. And you'll notice what's ahead of them is literally GW and P3, right? Warhammer 40K sits at the top of this list for a long time. It's only in the past year, actually 6 months really to be accurate, that they have been dethroned. Not by P3, I might add, by somebody who may be relevant to this story later, or interesting to this story later. Somebody will certainly touch on. Anyway, so they're right there. Now, but the problem is, at 70 employees and selling what they're selling, you know, they start wanting to make some more properties, getting into other types of games, other offerings. They're starting to expand how big their game is. They're wanting to change editions. The rules are getting bigger. They're sort of streamlining things and balancing things, but they're still growing. Offering more armies, changing the size you needed to play, all this sort of stuff. They're launching an RPG in 2006, sort of operating outside of their core competency, as it were. All of this is very explosive growth. But growth has challenges. So very quickly, cost becomes an issue because they're producing metal on a scale that they really never intended. You know, they're not exactly a boutique miniature company, but they were never really. They were when they started and grew fairly rapidly by the terms of these companies. And so, in 2006, Rackham releases their sci-fi game AT-43, and it consists of pre-painted plastics. This is one of them over on the right, and they look fine. The problem is they don't look amazing. And it seems silly to say, but the problem is when you set the bar with your game at the best, right, of the best on the market, okay, and then instead your new game is released with mid-quality miniatures, you kill your differentiator. At the same time, not too far afterward, we have the 4th edition of Confrontation, the Age of Ragnarok, and changed the game quite drastically in the way it played. There were so many changes. There's too many to really list. Just know it was a very different game, which some games have navigated. Every edition of D&D is a very different game than the one before it. And yet it still has been number 1 for more or less all of its history. But most importantly, they went to plastics there as well. They looked like that, right? So now, instead of these beautiful miniatures with these insane paint jobs that you would see, right, on the box, think about it again. You walk into the game store, and you saw these incredible painted miniatures. Now, it doesn't matter if you're able to paint that or not. It's aspirational. In your mind, the product has that quality. When you see something so beautiful, that's where your head anchors the quality of the product at, regardless of what you're going to be able to do with it when you get it home. Whereas now, when I look in the box, what I see is a bunch of pre-painted D&D minis. Yeah, they're better than that. They are. They're also way more expensive than that, too. Way more expensive than that. And the quality level here of looking at that, it just isn't even the same. It's not even the same league. So the one thing that made them really set aside was suddenly gone. Right? Now, why was this happening? Well, around this time, 2005, they go public. And they get a very big investor. And they're going public. I just made little finger air quotes. wasn't really like, say, Games Workshop is a publicly traded company where they have like a very large suite of stockholders and a board and stuff like that. It was more one company, this venture capitalist, entrepreneurial ventures or something is the name of it, quite original, invests in them and starts making clearly a lot of decisions. When you've got one massive investor, they get to steer the ship. Shareholders always have some say, but this was a just complete paradigm shift in an attempt to keep up with their just really, really fast growth and at the same time increase their profit. Because that's what any investor is going to want. The shareholder wants returns on their shares, on their investment. It's not surprising. The end is nigh. Yes, indeed. So, very quickly, it all falls apart. Like, the speed with which this goes off the rails is amazing. 2005, they go public. They get the investor. 2006, they start releasing the plastic stuff. They come out with Age of Ragnarok. They change the game. 2008, Jean Bay steps down from CEO, becomes the art director. Rackham becomes Rackham Entertainment, rebrands itself under a new name, and has all these sort of new amorphous product plans, for the future. 2010, they liquidate and dissolve. And really those last 2 years were ending with a whimper, not a bang. It's absolutely this, it's a couple years of a slow, whimpering death, frankly. And in looking back and doing research for this, there were so many articles and blog posts and stuff like that read at the time of people just freaking out and like, what's going to happen? Is everything going to fall apart? Well, yeah, it did. Because again, this company was never really big enough to survive this kind of impact, right? And so when they moved away from their core competency, when they changed their entire product line, when they changed the quality of their product line and killed the thing that made them, well, there it was. So it leaves us with a question. What happened? And there is a lot of argument about this, and I don't know that it's ever really been sussed out. Jean Bay hasn't done a huge number of interviews. I think he did one with Figure Painter a long time ago, where he kind of talked about some of it, but he also talked about new projects and stuff. And certainly he's still around and very successful. He's moved on to newer opportunities and found a great amount of success in the artistic creative world. But if I had to guess at what happened, we're entering the part where this is all conjecture on my part. This is as much as I can put together from reading through and researching this. But here's what I think led to the downfall of this very promising company. Which, by the way, I just have this beautiful miniature on the right. When I talk about a clear aesthetic and something so unique, this is what I'm talking about, right? Like, look at this thing. What is that? It's just the most crazy, unique, beautiful, and strange, nightmarish yet wondrous vision of a miniature. Clearly, basing wasn't a priority in any of these things, but I'll give them the pass because the painting itself is fantastic. So, like this weird castle goblin troll being ridden by two goblins with a cannon, it's nuts. Anyways, here's what I think happened. So, one, we had this push into too big a market simultaneously. I call it the too much bread syndrome. Too little butter, too much bread, right? They were trying to make an RPG. They're making several different games, and they're growing at just a very rapid pace. And so all of a sudden, everything is just getting big too fast. Back in the early 2000s, one of the specialist games hit so successfully for GW, it almost put them out of business. That's weird to think about, but that's what happens. It's as outside viewers, it's tough for us to understand that. But when demand gets too big, and you try to advance too quick to keep up with it, so you start opening factories and ramping up employees and doing all this stuff you can suddenly run yourself so deep into the red that if your projections don't deliver exactly, you just bankrupted and blew up your company. Right? So you can be so successful you kill yourself really fast as a company. It's funny to think about. We think, well, of course, you just want to sell more stuff. It's never bad. Nope, it's real bad if you don't have the right leadership and logistics and strategy in place to handle that kind of growth. And, explosive growth is just something really, really hard to plan for. All right. It was also always a complex game that was simply more about the miniatures than the game itself. I have a few confrontation minis. I never played the game. Most of my friends who I've played Warhammer with for years have a few confrontation minis. They bought the ones they kind of liked. We never played the game. We just kept playing Warhammer and buying Warhammer stuff because that was the game we liked. We weren't interested in a new game. We were interested in their beautiful miniatures. And sure, we would have kept buying a few here or there. But the unique aesthetic that set them aside also prevents them from being wildly successful in the total long term. Because they are so unique. It's not like GW held this space where they sort of had the core fantasy market. And so most people's expectations met that. This weird castle goblin cannon troll thing is a gorgeous miniature. But you're not buying that to use in another game, or if you are, you're not buying the whole line. They were also fairly expensive. The miniatures were always quite expensive. Their prices were way up there long before GW's was. Or at the same time as. And they just didn't have the same universal appeal. They were beautiful miniatures, unique miniatures, but unique is a double-edged sword. When they moved to pre-painted, it killed the entire differentiator. So one of the things I've talked about so many times is that one of the recipes to Games Workshop success, and miniature companies in general, has been that you have to actually put together these miniatures and paint them. You are investing a part of yourself into miniatures. There is a mountain of psychological research that when people invest time into things, they value them higher. Okay? Whether it's folding little origami cranes or making little Lego men, the simplest of rote tasks, there's lots of research that shows people will value things that they themselves did higher than they would if they were just presented with it normally. By a large amount. Okay? You get emotionally invested in the stuff you put time in. Now, you might sit there and go, well, yeah, of course I do. I put time in it. But that's just the issue. When you start doing pre-painted stuff, they become more like toys. And other than a few toys you had as a kid, you're probably not that attached to your toys. You get a nice, pre-painted figure or something, like an action figure or something, or a bust. Yeah, it sits on your shelf. That's neat. It's cool. You might even like it if you really love the character. But it's not something you're super emotionally invested in. You happen to be emotionally invested in whatever that character is that you bought the bust of. If it was just some random fantasy thing, you're probably not buying it, right? And that's the problem. These had no emotional attachment. This wasn't like a bust of Batman that's pre-painted or something. This is just a pre-painted guy. Just an elf-looking guy with a sword. There's also a lot of stories of very unfriendly relations with the FLGS, especially post-investment. There's a lot of stories that I found in the research of them really pressuring the independent game stores for huge amounts of financial data and stuff like that. And the problem is, independent local game stores don't often keep such detailed information and certainly aren't wanting to provide it to a random company. And it was contingent that to carry their stuff, to carry Rackham stuff, you had to provide them with this information. I don't know how true all that is. I wasn't a game store owner at the time, certainly. But, if that is true, that's a huge hit. Because that's your only venue to really sell this stuff. The chasing the big dog syndrome of trying to be P3, trying to be GW, when they just weren't ready to scale up to that size yet. And then finally, the angel, those quotation marks are absolutely purposeful, investor. that ends up making a lot of decisions that don't necessarily run to the core differentiator and value proposition and competencies of the company. So I think that's the story of what happened there. There's a lot of instructional lessons there, I think. It's a shame. They still make some of the most beautiful miniatures, but I think, sadly, their age has passed by. There are some that are unique. There are some I still love. But here's the reality. When I go to Gen Con, there's a single store that has massive amounts of Rackham miniatures. Still for sale. Mostly at pretty close to their original price, as a matter of fact. And every year when I go, I look at them and I think, wow, some of these look really cool. But they're metal, and I hate metal. And they're expensive still, even. And, you know, they're too unique for me to use as stand-ins for most stuff. And I kind of look at them and I think, wow, those look really cool. And then I put them back on the shelf. And I've noticed that year over year, it seems like the same amount of stuff is on the shelf. Like, I'm sure they sell some, don't get me wrong. But it's not, like, not a ton of it moves. Now, I don't know how much this stuff sells on eBay. I know certainly there are a few characters and things like that sell for a lot of money. Because they were pretty hyper rare and they're pretty gorgeous, like the guy I showed earlier. They get used as stand-ins in other games, but I think for the most part, it's the story of it's a sad and unfortunate story of death by success, of a company that had such a beautiful vision, and it sort of didn't end up meshing with how reality worked out and some of the decisions that were made. But there you go. That's the history of Rackham miniatures from 1997 to 2010. I really hope you enjoyed. If you have more to add, or if you think I missed anything in the story of Rackham, throw it in the comments below. As I said, I tried to do a lot of research for this, but it's really scattered. I would love it if that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, to kind of collate a lot of this information together. But if you've got other pieces of the puzzle that I missed, hey, throw it down there. I'd love to learn even more. As always, don't forget to give it a subscribe if you want to see more Tabletop History or any of my other series. And of course, the greatest thing you can do is always share the video. If you enjoyed it, share it with a friend, point a friend to the channel. Always appreciate that. Thanks a lot. See you next time.